Over to you,
Yeah.
Tom.
Oh, thank you, Anel. I was going to call this talk "The Psychotherapist as the Eternal Exile," but just keep it at diversity and regression. So I'm reading this, so I'll just read it straight out. Yeah. If there is no place for change to develop apart from the arena of the punishing superego, then there will always be oppressive relations, fear, going underground what we cannot speak of, or fear to even think about. And as Freud has shown, the return of the repressed in all its forms. Husserl speaks of sedimented meanings, or those that all the normal people agree on, those that find their way into textbooks and dictionaries and become a kind of repository of normalization. Normal meanings are what I call given meanings. The given is partially the meaning that provoked old friends to abandon Oscar Wilde, to a life in exile and early death. The meanings that had countless children torn from their mothers in Ireland in the last century. My argument here is that the remit of the psychotherapist is not to be the sentinel of given meanings, because given meanings are culturally determined and solidify into something inflexible, and dare I say paranoid, conserving something of an orthodoxy. They are those meanings that are imposed on us as if they have been there forever. But instead, the therapist must be the guardian of the stranger, of those aspects of being that become suspect under the normative gaze of given meanings. Psychotherapy, therefore, must become the sanctuary of the exiled, no matter who or what that exile is. Just as Freud was marginalized by decent and scientific society, and although he was a white middle-class man, he was also a Jew in Austria and in exile at the end of his life. I argue that the psychotherapist ought to always take up that marginalized place of the essential privacy of the therapy space, where all sorts of conundrums, baggage, arcania of the soul, strangeness, and the adverse effects of the self-preserving orthodoxy of society, the effects of the logical positivist wasteland in which we live, can find an environment in which to speak, sometimes be understood, put itself under question, and even heal sometimes. The psychotherapist makes a space for the excluded, the marginalized, the historical leper, the objectionable, the wounded, the unacceptable, the scapegoat, the wanderer, and the permanently homeless aspects of human experience. And in order to provide such a space, one has to sense at some level one's own permanent exile, in language and the law, in a society that creates the human being to function as an alienated earning module or subject of scientism, an upstanding citizen of the alienated, where there is a quick cure for everything and everything is within our grasp. And what is so insidious to us, we are unaware of its effects until some crisis happens. You will find the alienation also in the walls you bump into in yourself and others along the way. And of course, in more naked aggression. Psychotherapy should not be a place where such an alienated society is meant to intervene in the human psyche, as if for some ideal of morality or notion of goodness, so that therapy becomes a place of homogenization, of monitoring, of medical or psychological scientism, of pasteurization of the milk of human creativity, where the false promise and urgency of a cure is offered. In such a general discourse of illness and conformity, of a universal code and divide between the sick and the well, a caste system of functionaries presides over the proper education of the sick who have no choice, where the other finally complies or disappears. It is no wonder there is no place for dreams in this setup, as dreams give the lie to the function of language and its bedfellow, the law. Those messengers and censors at work in our own selves through culture, that at every turn insist on certainty and construct enclosures. So when the psychotherapist takes up that central place of a normative function in society, they are already not doing psychotherapy. But what happens when you find yourself taking up that position? Even Lacan, despite his subversion of the subject, speaks of needing to keep a certain distance from our symptom. Does this mean he is saying we must not enjoy our symptom, but keep it at arm's length? Because embracing a symptom might well mean embracing more distress and breaking a law. And I believe this is what he means at one level. And at one level, the therapist has to keep in mind the law. The law regulates how we can enjoy ourselves, and its protective function is also an inhibiting function. To paraphrase Lacan, the law ruins everything for everybody. Perhaps this is always how it has to be. And so by definition, when we speak of diversity, we are drawing lines of exclusion and inclusion. We are pronouncing a proto-law being given birth to in language. You cannot enjoy yourself as you might want to because others exist. There is a clear tension then between subverting the oppression of others and also being subject to the law. As we can see, the tension breaks out in aggression all the time. At another level, we may have to keep a distance from our symptom to a more benign concern for others and ourselves. For example, the person who loves too much might have to come to terms with not loving so much. It is not prohibited by any law, but it is advised by a considerate concern not to love too much in some senses. When a prohibitive law is internalized, as in Freud's idea of the superego, it can take on monstrous punishing powers driven by a sense of conscience and guilt. Not only must you obey, but you must enjoy your obedience. And this is what we confront in some way in the psyche. Because with the threat of punishment comes silence, repression, something goes underground that will emerge again in some form, perhaps in a violent bureaucracy of the soul and extremism and polarizing thought. The space for the uncertain, for appearances or what might be, is no longer. Certainties rule. So there is always a tension between freeing the psyche and freeing society. I don't think freeing society is the remit of psychotherapy. That is the remit of all good people. But freeing up society can be a consequence of freeing a person's mind. The prisons that exist in the mind are not the same as the ones that exist in society. Our remit could be to dissolve, if possible, the entanglements that hinder us in relation to others, while also acknowledging that other people exist and the responsibilities and dangers that lie therein. I am not becoming freer in myself in order to oppress or exploit you better. Others must always be in the equation. Otherwise, we would only come to exist in self-serving, narcissistic relations, as we do, in couples, in families, in identity groups, working groups, politics, nationalities, and so on. Good, decent people loving our neighbour as ourselves. While what is exiled, the faltering unspoken, what we don't want to know about, is left wandering in a wasteland. How do we guard against something like the punishing superego taking over? I'm referring to Zizek's comments on the harsh law that demands you love your neighbour as yourself. It needs to be held in check, because if we treat the neighbour as ourselves, that just ends up in an endless cycle of punishment and identifications, as Freud discovered. Such a punitive law needs to be held in check now more than ever in our work by a more considerate law, where we hold close the importance of humility before others, where we refuse to think that we know, so that something different can begin to happen. What is diversity but the acceptance of difference? I suggest that something considerate has to happen through the acceptance of not knowing everything. of accepting the other as they are, of being open to the other, of humor, and of being suspicious of certainties, refusing to know too much, even when one knows too much, and not taking up a place in normative society, not becoming part of the society of given meanings, dare I say, the society for the protection of professional interests, and instead walking alongside another in the simple act of being for another person and all the complexity that entails. So I'll end there. I've tried to keep it short and sweet.
Great. Thank you very much, Tony. So quite a few things. And I wonder, any sort of thoughts, comments, immediate responses? Must say, I mean, there's much of it that I think is really great. Actually, what you've said, hard to sort of, you know, keep it going. But of course, I'm thinking that this idea that that we shouldn't get too caught up in normative meanings, that we're, you know, what things mean, that we're more open to what things might mean or what we make of things or something like that. I think that sounds really crucial, and the idea that I think we might have touched on in the small group I was in, the whole thing about the superego and the idea of taking up a really punitive sort of position towards people, and I guess the whole thing about the punitive position towards therapists as well. You know, the whole thing about, you know, you must do it this way or else. You know.
Yeah, and maybe, you know, maybe talking here today, it feels a bit like, it's like there's a kind of a presence of a superego up there, you know. You mustn't say anything that's too offensive, or, you know, you try to accommodate other people and all of that. And, you know, that's fine. But I think what happens is, if we, I suppose my point is, if we try to make psychotherapy normative, well, then what happens is, where is the voice then for the stranger? You know, where's the voice for the exile? Where's the voice that is, you know, in a way that we don't want to hear? You know, and that was probably Freud's great gift, maybe, that he opened up a space where at least people could just speak, free association,
and that
say
space,
whatever comes into you.
that space is becoming smaller and smaller, isn't it?
Yeah,
you know,
it is. Yeah,
you know, all the rules and regulations. It's difficult, you know, the pluses but the minuses of policies of safeguarding, and what's the other one?
Prevent, you mean?
Prevent, things like this, you see, which safe for sometimes, but also against. It's still, so yeah, I thought it was beautiful what you were saying, you know, wonderfully expressed. It's how do we stay with people on the margins, you know, and I think part of today is being able to hear people on various margins and be able to accept them. Yeah, I think that was another key word that came out for me from what you were saying. It's somehow being with them and being able to accept people, but also having a conversation with them. So it doesn't really say accepting them what agrees with everything they're saying and so on.
Yeah, it's a kind of dialogue, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
How do we accept people and have a dialogue?
Yeah, I thought you were saying something very. Sorry, Della. I thought you were saying something very important about you know, how we might sort of get sort of, we might hide behind the normative in ourselves, to put it that way, and champion normativity. I thought that's a very important thing to sort of say in a way.
Yeah.
And it links in with, you know, this whole notion of professionalization, doesn't it? You know, the kind of way that we're training people on the rules of our professional bodies, and where they help and when they hinder what you're talking about.
So it makes me think too, I'm sorry if I'm speaking too much, but it makes me think too, something was said earlier about, you know, psychotherapy and what is it like to be a human being. But I think it's less what is it like to be a human being and more what is it like to be that person in a way. And I think there's something about the different sort of persons that we are in some ways, all the different things that we might sort of retreat behind normativity to sort of get away from.
Yeah. I suppose it's one of the reasons I'm interested in dreams, you know, because dreams tend to pull the carpet out from underneath, you know, the kind of an ego that we might be presenting, or a sense of coherence about ourselves, you know. You know, we're all very self-aware, you know, educated, culturally informed people, and then a dream will kind of cut across the whole lot, you know. And that isn't about condemning it with some kind of punishing superego. It's about just opening it up and just letting it have some air, you know.
Well, we probably should be bringing this to an end, shouldn't we? We've really got about just under a minute. Unless there's something that, I mean, there might be something someone wants to say, but if there isn't, we might need to move on to the next presentation. Oh, someone, Eric?
Yeah, Tony, I wonder, what's your take on the expression sacred in terms of the talk that you've given?
Sacred.
Because you're touching on the sacred almost in a lot of what you've described, you know, sort of the sacredness of the meeting, the allowance of the other, all that kind of stuff. It's touching on sacredness for me from the way you've described it.
Yeah, I was thinking of the unknown, you know, when you said it, I thought of the unknown. Yeah, opening up a kind of a place, I suppose, where an unknown part of a person can be respected and left alone, if you like, not interfered with. That's what struck me when you said it. I was thinking of you know, Roman Catholic tabernacles where we're left alone. Yeah. But,
did I sound too religious?
Well, it did sound religious a bit, yeah. But yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.